We pick up in 1605 here with the Battle of Gettysburg. So we had discussed the defeat of the Union Army at the Battle of Chancellorsville in May, where Joseph Hooker is defeated by Lee as one of his most perfect battles, and then Hooker is going to be replaced with a new Union commander. So that's which one we're doing right here, and the name of that guy would be George Meade. So there's George Meade. He is a Pennsylvanian. He takes command of the Army of the Potomac just 4 days before the Battle of Gettysburg. So what has happened in the meantime is that Lee has gotten approval for his invasion of the North and to try and seize Harrisburg, and so he moves his army up north through Western Virginia, through Maryland, and into southern Pennsylvania. So some things that we should have down just in our notes of the importance of the Battle of Gettysburg is a few things across the top. First of all, of course, dates. 1st through the 3rd, it's a 3-day battle, and the numbers are quite large. You're talking about 150,000 men with combination on both sides. So George Meade and the Army of the Potomac is trying to catch up with and stop the Army of Northern Virginia under Robert E. Lee. So it is considered the turning point battle of the war, this one and Vicksburg that follows it. And the reason for that is that, remember, the war has not been going well. The only real victory that can be claimed by the Union would be the Battle of Antietam, which was in the fall of -- and that wasn't really a clear-cut victory. It is considered the bloodiest battle of the war, meaning of total casualties. You have 50,000 that would be killed, captured, wounded, or missing. And so that is going to be twice the number of the Battle of Antietam, which is just a single-day battle. And as we mentioned, it's also the largest. So when we talk about the Rebs and they talk about the high water mark of the Confederacy, what they're talking about is that the Army of Northern Virginia will never be as strong or stronger than it is in July of 1863. It will continue to shrink over the next 2 years. So that's basically what accounts for the largest battle of the war. So the battle comes to Gettysburg, which is just a really small town, 2,500 residents, and with over 3 days of fighting, you have 150,000 people there, and you have, of course, all the remains of the dead and wounded scattered across miles and miles of battlefield. So let's start with how it begins. Well, it begins with General Meade here sending out his cavalry. This would be his cavalry commander, John Buford, to look for the Army of Northern Virginia. And good news is he finds them. The bad news is he's outnumbered, and they are already into and crossing into parts of southern Pennsylvania. So what he is instructed to do is basically have a holding action on the first day of July. Lee is still south of Gettysburg. He's basically crossing from Maryland, from Virginia to Maryland. And what happens is one of his lead developments and lead units runs into, you have this infantry running into Buford and his cavalry. And you can sort of see why General Lee picked Gettysburg as a place to strengthen his army. His army is all stretched out all the way up towards Harrisburg and all the way back down into parts of Maryland. And so the reason that he picked Gettysburg is you can sort of see all these little pikes, these roads that kind of make the spokes of a wheel coming into Gettysburg. So it just made logical sense. So on the first day, Buford tries to hold along the Chambersburg Pike here, but he's pushed by Confederate infantry backwards through the town, and then they fortify themselves on the hills south of town. So the second day, what happens there is over the night of the 1st into the 2nd, you have massive numbers of men and troops for both sides filling in to the Gettysburg area. So stretching from here in Culp's Hill all the way down to Round Tops is about a mile. And then about a mile away, you have the Army of Northern Virginia strengthening itself to basically mirror that kind of line. So some people say it is like a fish hook. So if you move Sickles' corps back here. So this happens, and so on the second day, Lee sends his, what they call flanks, the ends of his armies, to attack the ends of the Union line, thinking that if they could break through there, they could actually attack the Union army from the rear and destroy it. What happens is neither side really gains an advantage, and so since the first day is usually thought of as a Confederate victory because they push them through the south into the hills, the second day is usually thought of as a Union victory because they hold, they don't break. But neither side is really, it's basically a stalemate. So the third day comes, and what happens on the third day is Lee has attacked the end, so he believes the middle is weak. And so he's going to launch the largest real infantry charge of the war. You'll see some discussions about that, but you're talking between 12 and 15,000 men. And that's going to be simply known as Pickett's charge. So here's George Pickett. So his division is the largest number of the 12 to 15,000. That's why it gets the name Pickett's charge. So he is instructed to cover 1 mile of open ground and attack the center of Union lines. And that is going to prove very, very difficult and then obviously impossible. And so his unit and this charge suffers heavy, heavy casualties. You're talking about 50%, around 6,000 soldiers and officers make it back of the 12 to 15,000. So it is an utter and clear defeat of Robert E. Lee, and that is why it is so important in our studies, is to understand the impact of the Battle of Gettysburg. So here you can sort of see it culminating at the angle that's right there on Cemetery Ridge. These would, of course, be the Confederates trying to attack the Union. Here the Union holds a very strong defensive line, and they're able to turn back the Confederates, who are quite winded and defeated and decimated as they reach Union lines. So that is July 3rd. On July 4th, Robert E. Lee starts to evacuate the Army of Northern Virginia. So they head south. So what happens next is, the reason why this was so important is that it's followed up with an event that's 1,000 miles away, but nonetheless very, very important, and that would be the city of Vicksburg is captured the day after they surrender. And we'll talk about this devastating loss to the Confederacy. So the city of Vicksburg is captured by this man. This is Ulysses S. Grant. After several months of fighting, of siege warfare, he is able to convince the residents of Vicksburg there's no longer any reason to resist, and moves into and occupies the city of Vicksburg. The reason why that's so important is that Vicksburg, of course, right here sits on the Mississippi River. And so it is the last major Confederate stronghold. And now the Union has achieved one of its clear three strategies to win the war. It is the entire control to split the Confederacy and now have that conduit and that pathway to use for their forces. If you look at this next picture, you can sort of see that nothing could really get past Vicksburg because it sits up here on this high bluff right on as the Mississippi passes by it. So you can sort of see some basically kind of ironclads kind of shelling the city, and you can sort of see those high bluffs there at Vicksburg. But he is able to capture it, and that, of course, is another important turning point battle, is the fall of Vicksburg the day afterwards. Union General William T. Sherman, meanwhile, takes command of Grant's old army after he's able to capture both Vicksburg and then moves north into Tennessee. And Sherman takes that army and moves south towards the city of Atlanta. You can sort of see that here. So the movement towards Atlanta, a very important, crucial railway junction for the South, and so its capture by the Union would prove very devastating. So that's what happens basically in the summer, and then the fall of 1864. He moves from Tennessee towards Atlanta. You can sort of see that here. Sherman moving away from Chattanooga and into northern Georgia, and eventually on the doorsteps of Atlanta. So what happens here is that he decides to burn the city as a way of breaking Southern morale. Now, he doesn't order its evacuation, but realizes this is going to be a very important tool, is the devastation of the South. So I found this quote, I thought it was very important to kind of capture his mood. War's the remedy our enemies have chosen, and I say let us give them all they want. So he has no real bad feelings about burning Atlanta to the ground. He does that, and then he's going to make his historic march to the sea, in which he's going to basically open up his army, spread it as wide as it'll go, between 30, 40 miles wide, and march approximately 300 miles to the coast. And that coastal city will be the city of Savannah. Savannah, Georgia sits there on the coast, and he is going to, as he says, I will make Georgia howl, meaning he is going to march through there, capturing and destroying anything he cannot take, and this becomes his historic march to the sea. It goes from pretty much the fall right onto the doorsteps of Christmas. So this is known as that total warfare. Cows, sheep, anything else that he can use for his armies to feed them, he'll take. Any kind of stores of supplies that he's captured, that's great. Anything else is basically burned and destroyed. And he's trying to break the will of the Southern people. So here we go, another quote. I intend to make Georgia howl. Here is a quote after he captures it on December 22nd. If you look at it real close, Savannah, December 22nd, 1864, to His Excellency the President Lincoln, I beg to present to you as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah with 150 heavy guns and plenty of ammunition, and also about 25,000 bales of cotton. I kind of cut off his signature there. So this is one of his famous, telegrams to the President of the United States, which makes Lincoln very, very popular and very successful. He had just won re-election in the previous month of November due to the actions of him capturing Atlanta previously. So this is going to prove really important. And so we are going to stop here, and this will be our final part of our study. Is we're going to cover the last summer of the war and into the spring of 1865.